Okay, I'm gonna start the recording now. All right, we are recording.
Cool. Thank you. Okay. Well, I hope everyone's well. Good morning. If you're in North America, I can see a few vests actually, and insulated vests and stuff today. So I'm guessing it must be a cold snap. It's always good to see. I was just going to. So yeah, we're just going to run ahead with a sort of a standard meeting today. But Mike and the team at Toho Water have come across with a suggestion that they wanted to cover off today. So you'll see that in terms of a presentation that they're going to provide. So it looks like we've got a pretty good representation on the call, which is great to see. I'm just having a quick look at that now. Yeah, no, it doesn't help me because it's limiting what I can see. But no, there's about 18 of us, which is good. So I think we've got good representation for virtually everyone. We've got Mike Barnett and John Coultis on the line as well. Chaps, with what we've looked at in terms of some of the process work that we've done over the last week, I'll get in touch with you probably after this call just to get you to send me a few screenshot or PDF files that, just because I'm struggling with loading up the download that I provided that I made before our access was restricted. So I'll pick that up with you both.
Sure.
Rich, I think Tim has his hand up.
Yeah, I think it's Tim, do you want to try and speak? I think we're just sorting the.
Yeah, go ahead and say something, Tim.
Tim.
He's on your phone, Mike.
Can y'all hear me all right?
That's not too bad.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not too bad. Cool. Okay, so if he's on your phone, it looks like that might work, Mike. Cool. I just want to start with a safety moment today. So just referencing yesterday, which was International Women's Day. So there's been a fair bit of discussion, certainly across here in the UK within our utility environment agency, Team 200, just about what that means to us in terms of our culture on Team 200 across the organisation. It's prompted some pretty good conversations actually. We've spoken a lot about whether specifying International Women's Day as its own day is a help or hindrance, but generally the intent and the focus on it being its own day does bring to light some of the work that we need to do in terms of driving equality and diversity. So I've taken a lot from it, and I hope some of you have too. I think we've got to continue to challenge ourselves to look at what our gender spread is across our teams and our organisations. And certainly for me today, a couple of things that I was reflecting upon was the idea of whether you're male or female and you're in a mentor or an advocate role, just being clear about what your role is for colleagues, friends and family. Are you a mentor and you're guiding someone along the way, or are you an advocate? And I think certainly our challenge or my challenge is probably choosing to be a better advocate for female colleagues and friends and family as well. So I think it's great that there's an international day and the focus that comes along with that, but it's useful as a time to reflect on what we could do better, and also a lot of the great things that women do in our organisations and our utilities. So we've got to challenge ourselves to champion that a lot more as well. Cool. So what we're going to do today, I'll move on to the agenda proper, but we're just going to do a quick refresh of workshop outputs and a review of the skeleton report. So when I say report, we're into the reporting month, and we're looking to get back to UAIM, what we have covered over the past year. And it's been really useful as I've started to draft this, because I actually think we've got through a fair bit as a group, which is great, considering we've just done it a lot in this format. And what I've been really pleased to see is that we've maintained alignment with the 2B process that we established in year one, and also some of those challenges that we identified towards the back end of year one are still coming through in all of those workshops that we've participated in. So kudos to everyone in the group for keeping that focus and keeping things relevant, because I think we've got a solid report to present back to yourself, Cello, Scott, and others, and also I think it sets things up quite nicely for how the topic group and developing asset management plans could continue to thrive in the future. So what does the skeleton report just look like? I'm going to jump out of this agenda because we'll close this one down, and then Mike, I'll pass over to you for the bulk of today's session to look at asset management in the execution of a PMO, which should be great, and then we'll get into that. So I'm just going to stop sharing this one now. And just jump into the skeleton report because it's very much a draft at this point in time, but you'll see, where are we? This is it. Cool. So we're looking at year 2 progress. This is going to cast people's minds back to December when we first looked at the workshop topics, but just a reminder around the background of what we're trying to achieve here. So again, the reference point, if I scroll through, is that to be process. We've spent a lot of our time looking at sort of what the AMP scope and what it as a platform actually looks like. And it's been really great of late to see us delving into some of these specific process areas down here, particularly around prioritization, understanding criticality, and then the management strategies that comes out of the back of some of the life cycle modeling work that we undertake in different capacities. So we've done a little bit in terms of drafting a process associated with some of the life cycle modeling, tag that to the development of a management strategy. But we're just going to talk about how that original workshop we held back in sort of October time helped us identify what the key topics were for the year, and how we've progressed those through the workshop format. So again, you'll remember we talked about digital asset management plans, the challenges, benefits, how they can help engage and support, and also their field use. And we're going to bring to light a lot of the results that we all contributed to in that workshop. That's going to replicate across through to the life cycle modeling and costs that you hosted from that Tacoma hosted, and then more latterly the asset criticality and prioritization workshop, which was preceded by a number of presentations. So what I'm going to ask the group to do, either this week or next, once we've got this draft in a fit state to review, is I'll post it on the Teams channel. And if you can just go in and should be able to collaboratively add comments or any edits, suggestions to that, should be able to do that on the Teams channel. Please do so, which gives us the chance to sort of do a final pass before we get together before the end of March and have that ready to go back in as our progress report for the year. Does anyone have any questions on that?
Richard, it's Mark. Real quick, can you maybe just shoot us a quick email just to let us know if it's been posted, if you don't mind? Yep. Sometimes that notification in another Teams may not come through as smoothly. I
feel your pain. Yep, no worries. Yeah, that's a good shout actually, because I'm not sure I emailed the agenda around today, but no, I did, but I'll make a note of that, Mert. Thanks.
Richard.
Yes.
This is Doug. We did have a presentation on service level metrics, and that's obviously a big part of our AMP.
Yep.
Is some of that going to make its way in here too?
Yeah, is that a presentation you still, in terms of before the end of the year, Doug?
He gave one.
It's one I gave already.
Why? Yes, so it was back at when we did this presentation here on that first workshop. You're right. That's when it was covered. So we'll mention it as being workshop 1 of 4. Although we've kind of gone into these 3 focus workshops. So you'll see reference to it.
I think I did it in December, not back in October.
I'm sure either I'm getting confused, Doug, or I'm sure it was, because I've looked back at the comments that we've made. Anyway, it will be covered in there, Doug. Yeah, I think that's
all I need.
That's it. No worries. Okay, anyone else? No worries. Okay, I'll send out a note when that draft's ready, and your comments and feedback will be much appreciated. Cool. Okay, that gets us to Mike, yourself, and Tim. Do you want to just check some of the volume once again?
Yeah, do a sound check test.
Yours is good.
Got an echo from Tim.
Which I
We'll
think
try
is
that
gone
again.
now.
Test 1, 2, 3.
Let's try that again. That's from Tim.
Can you hear Tim okay?
Yep.
All right.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Tim.
Yeah, we got a thumbs up, Tim. We'll go ahead and get started. Hopefully everybody can see my screen.
Like I'm not hearing you.
Oh, hang on. How about now? Test, test.
That's good. Thank you.
Okay, sure. All right, so title slide, implementing a project management office. This started for us about a year ago, almost to the day. It was in early March when we were trying to put together some goals and objectives for this project management office you're going to hear about today. It has a considerable asset management component to it, but also is featuring the people side of asset management, which we will save for the second half of this, and that's with help from Veronica Jensen, who is with Toho Water Authority, and you're going to get introduced to her through these slides. And she's online here, so we'll go ahead and get started. So our agenda today is really simple. We're going to talk about the drivers, why we create a project management office, and next, the structure and function of that office. Then you'll see the asset management at work there, that component, but it's actually a whole orchestra, if you will, of work and meshing of gears to handle an acceleration of a rehabilitation program you'll hear a little bit more about. Third thing is the people challenges. We're going to talk about how we kind of figured out that we need to optimize what we were doing a few months in and really help accelerate the acceleration, if you will, and then some conclusions and next steps. So I'll start with the drivers for creating a project management office. So it's a busy slide, admittedly, but just obligatory, what's Toho about in the way of our collection systems? We are focusing on specifically the collection system for the PMO formation, but we want to eventually expand it. So we're about a medium-sized utility, nothing in metrics. Sorry about that, Richard and others, but we're spread out. We cover a lot of area, a downtown area, and out in lots of different subdivisions in our service area. We have a lot of lift stations, as you can see, more than maybe what some are used to for the size of the collection system. And we have a lot of small water reclamation plants out there. The biggest that we have is somewhere in the 14, 15 million gallon range. So we wanted to focus on gravity mains because we were starting to see an acceleration, if you will, of some problems that were happening. We had a pretty aggressive condition assessment program. It's turning into a lot of work orders in the hundreds of work orders. Capital improvement plan to reduce I&I was already in place. Field services, the folks that handle the distribution and collection system, we're a combined utility. We also do reuse, by the way, was very busy with the reactive, preventive, and planned work orders. So we're looking for a way to bring this all together. And this is a main driver was certainly costs. In our capital improvement program, we do city and road projects, meaning that when roads expand and they widen or they expand and lengthen, we have to move utilities. And so we kind of count on the county to feed us what it is that they're going to do. Sometimes they do it on time and sometimes they do it by surprise. But we also have those other programs I've mentioned too that basically build upon it. So our capital improvement plan in the jagged red line is growing, as you can see, over the period of time that up until recent times. The rehabilitation spend is considerable. What you see here, I know the blues are a little bit confusing, but we have a rehabilitation spend that's increasing. We have emergency responses. This is one of keen interest. We did see a peak. This is obviously a few years ago, but this is when we're starting to think about what to do and how we're going to fund an acceleration program. And altogether, it's the total spend is increasing. Emergency repairs are starting to take up a lot of our budget, considerable amount. And in fact, these were consuming a higher and higher percentage of the planned rehab work that we were doing. In fact, we weren't sure where we were going here in terms of it increasing and then increasing the overall spend. We just felt we really needed to get this thing under control and not only used the condition assessment program information, but go after some additional data and process it more quickly and get projects going and get the dirt flying in terms of repairs and such before failures. It also prompted us to apply for a WIFIA loan. If you're not familiar with that, most of you probably are. It's the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act. It's kind of like road loans for road construction, and it's in force, and it's a very good program with very favorable rates. But what our data was showing us that had a lot of data to look at, scheduled work versus emergency work. You hear that it's a 10-to-1 ratio. If you have scheduled work, it costs a certain amount. If you have to get in there and do it quickly and do it in an emergency fashion, it's 10 times. And our data almost exactly matched that. It's tried and true, if you will. So some of the benefits we were looking for with PMO in the formation of it is to obviously reduce the number of collection system failure. We were seeing road collapses. We were seeing lift station, believe it or not, collapses and other issues. Also spills, sanitary sewer overflows were an issue, and they were increasing. We wanted to reduce or reverse the trend that we were starting to see. We wanted to lower the costs, as I just mentioned earlier, and reduce the reactive work that's associated with that kind of work, which gets into urgent or emergency work. And obviously reduce the infiltration in this collection system, some of it hidden over a period of time, causing depressions in the road and energy consumption that goes along with it that's increased and so forth. So I'll have Tim coming up here next. I'm going to go ahead and advance the slides for you, Tim, but we're going to talk a bit about the PMO structure, the process, if you will, and how it functions. So Tim, take it away.
Well, hopefully you can all hear me fine.
I think they can.
Okay, good. So Mike went ahead and touched on the metrics drivers and the improvement we're trying to drive in terms of the PMO. But one of the largest things we were trying to accomplish with the implementation of the PMO is to increase the transparency or provide provide transparency to the issues that we were aware of. So all parties, we're dealing with a large sandbox here. We've got operations involved, we've got planning involved, we've got engineering projects involved. It was very important that we improve the transparency of the known issues, as well as the plans to address those, and address a programmatic approach to learning about those unknown issues, the driving and condition assessment program. So first thing we had to do is get on a single page and share with the organization and others what the PMO meant to us and what was this. And what you see here is it's centered around a known issues database that's shown there at the top of the page. That's where we capture those things which field services is identified, that our asset management program has identified, and we put together a plan around that. We recognize that there are inputs to this process from the customer as well as from asset management that will drive this. That's the learning that will continue to take place. The analyze and prioritize is the making decisions based on criticality. And really that blue box you see around there, that's kind of a box around the asset management organization. And then based on what you know, figure out how to best to address that, whether it's something that's urgent enough that needs to be addressed as an emergency, an expedited project, or just a normally planned project. So determine approach, and then execute consistently, as well as learn. So, Mike, if you go ahead and go to the next slide. So, as I mentioned, that takes this slide, which is on one page. It's not consistent with really what we've been dealing with in terms of how we show progress processes, but this starts to take this and translates it into higher level context diagrams. So the identify, those are the inputs to the process, either coming from our customer through our call center or from the asset management program. Next. The planning portion, and we talked about that before Mike started the presentation. This is looking at the information, identifying your probability of failure, your consequence of failure, and translating that into a asset level as well as a composite project level criticality and priority order. Next. Taking this information then and deciding, having the members of the PMO decide based on the urgency, price, based on the risk, what's the best way to approach this? Whether it's an emergency project, which is all out and needs to get addressed within months, not years. An expedited project, which is a 6 months to 12 months, or the normally planned projects, which is 1 to 3 years. Next. Go into a design phase, again, a consistent design phase to identify what needs to get done and ensure that not only the items that are known are incorporated into that, but also potential learning from work order mining gets incorporated. Next. Approve phase, which is if you're going to spend money, you got to have that approved phase. So that's not only approving the design and content, but also the budget and the go ahead. And then next, and then perform. That's executing the projects in a consistent manner, and then also learning from that execution and feeding back into your asset management system and your asset registry. Next, Mike. So those are all the different components. And what you've got is you've got the PMO that, as Mike mentioned, orchestrates this. You don't have the PMO jumping in and doing these individual things just as a conductor. It doesn't play the instrument. This is the PMO's up front, waving the baton and keeping things in sync and ensuring that communication's done and groups are pulled in as they need to be pulled in and contribute to the effective execution of the program. Next page. So translating that into something that we've been working with in terms of the BPM, and this takes that initial chart and again at the high level goes ahead based on context is colored. You've got underneath, you've got to identify the problem. Up towards the top, that's the data coming in from the customer and being addressed by our customer call center as well as our field operations group. Down towards the bottom, that link is the asset management program. That's being driven by our asset management program and a targeted condition assessment program, which again is also driven based on potential risk. The data store that's shown there is our work management system. We've decided to utilize the work management system as that central sandbox where people can go and find out if something is known about a problem, what the deficiencies are, and how they're being addressed in terms of projects and those project schedules. In the blue, that's the plan and decide. So that goes ahead and bottom box again in the asset management is the calculate the criticality, grouping those into projects, prioritizing those projects and moving them forward. The green is design, the yellow is authorized, and the orange is getting it done. So that's the bid it, manage it, and report on it. translation of the PMO process that we piloted represented in a BPM.
Very good, Tim. Thanks. Okay, so the big part of the PMO is obviously asset management, but Ewing has 3 tracks, as everybody knows, about the people side: culture, organizational culture, workforce, and Cello, what's the third one? Workforce, culture, and
Change management.
thank you. Gosh, thanks, Doug. Okay, so with us is Veronica Jensen. She's also with Toho. She's new to the PMO team, so to speak, that she's been following it, but she comes with if you've seen that movie Taken, some special skills, specific skills. She's a professional project management person, and she's going to talk about the people side from, I think, a unique perspective. So Veronica, go ahead.
All right, thank you, Mike. Hopefully you guys can hear me well.
Yes.
We're going to talk about some of the key roles that are associated with the PMO, starting with the engineering and asset management team, where they take all of our data and they use that to prioritize the projects. That goes into field operations. Our field operations crew plays a huge role in overseeing a lot of the emergencies and also is a important liaison between Toho Water, Tetra Tech, and any other consultants and contractors that we have out in the field. Toho leadership, they're as well important stakeholder in all of this. They provide the direction and also make sure that we're aware of opportunities for improvement and other snags we may hit along the process. They're seeing everything from a very high level, and sometimes they can see things we don't see when we're looking at it at a very intimate degree. Mike, please, next one. Another key role in all of this has been our consultant. Our consultant has provided us with construction, PMO, and compliance management. So they play a huge role in this program. EPA, WIFIA, like Mike mentioned, they issued the loan. So they set the loan criteria. Up until a few weeks ago, we were set to go through our first compliance audit with EPA. That has been postponed, but that's certainly, they're an important stakeholder, and those requirements are always at the forefront of this program. And finally, the contractor community, they're the ones doing the work. So they're an incredibly important stakeholder. They're also the ones that our customers see when they're driving through their neighborhoods and seeing the work actually taking place. It's our contractors that they see. So it's very close that we maintain a very close relationship with the contractor community. Next one, please. This is just another way of looking at all of these different stakeholders and how they have to really come together. And there's an interdependent relationship. And when all of these circles start working together and in unison, real progress is made. And so it just gives you another glimpse of just how many different moving pieces we've got going on in the PMO. And it's really very fascinating to see it all work and come together. Next one, please, Mike. Now, some obstacles in terms of implementation. Of course, with any new program, there's always more opportunities than successes in the very beginning, and this is no different. Some of the initial obstacles were defining roles and responsibilities. Also, many of the duties that came along with the PMO were added to existing full-time positions and people that are already working in other areas. So it can be very additive, and that was definitely a hurdle that's something that needs to be considered whenever starting a new program. The scope of the consultant's role grew over time as well to fill that void. So that was something that also was an opportunity for improvement in terms of making sure that our consultant's role is well defined and kind of controlled. The administrative processes were an area that could be improved. Coordination between the different departments, that was certainly important, like we saw in the previous slide. All of these different groups have to come together and work, and that takes coordination, and just making sure that that coordination led to effective decision making was an area for improvement as well. And finally, KPIs for asset performance. That's a continuous process, and just making sure that we're always looking at our KPIs and that our KPIs are adjusting as we mature and as our program continues to develop and we start to see successes and progress, that our KPIs keep going forward. Next slide, please. This is the same chart you saw earlier, but what you're going to see here is kind of how those opportunities for improvement relate to the process as a whole. So Mike, if you can start it. Going back to how we identify and how we identify our needs, we're actually doing that pretty well. We worked with a third party to look at the PMO, look at what we were doing, the processes behind it. And she helped us identify the areas that are working really, really well, and there aren't many, and then what areas we can improve on and kind of keep going. So the identifying the projects is working very well, and we're doing that very well. Keep going, Mike. Planning, that was an opportunity for improvement. It wasn't a high priority, but it was an area that we can work towards. So you could see here, the decision making, that's in red. That was kind of a high priority area that we can look at in terms of if we're going to focus on improving the PMO. These are some of the initial areas. So the decision makers within engineering and operations, also improving those administrative processes were definitely high priority. Design, that's working very well. The approving stage, that was an opportunity for improvement, just to make sure that there is process accountability and that as projects come through this flow, that they're in alignment with the risk and objectives. Performing the work, that's it's not in red, so it's kind of a middle area that we can, once we've dealt with those areas in red, then we naturally look at those areas in yellow. We could streamline our administrative processes, of course, make sure that those are really efficient and effective. And like I mentioned, KPIs are an evolving thing that you want to look at as your program matures and you make progress. Next slide, please. So here's kind of where we're at now. In terms of those roles and responsibilities, we've come to a place where our director of engineering and the director of operations, aka shredders, have been put in a position to be the decision makers in the PMO to make sure that those decisions are being made, factoring everything, but being made in a timely fashion so as not to slow the progress of the work that's being done in the PMO. And I was tasked with being a facilitator, pretty much, just making sure that the administrative process is working, that if we do have any snags, trying to improve those, iron those areas out. And it, the Ninja Turtles were popular in the 80s and they still are now. So it's definitely, it brings a little bit of humor to what can be a very big effort. But it's certainly when you have the right people and you put them in a position and you have leadership provide the support, which they've absolutely done, you can certainly make something like PMO work for your organization. Mike, back to you.
Just come off mute. Sorry, Mike. Hang on. You there was.
Here I am.
Yeah,
Okay.
there was some echo there, so we muted you. Sorry
No
about that.
worries. I should have guessed that. Am I still sharing?
Yeah, we could see the slide that shows the maturity models enabling improvement.
Okay, so the maturity models are depicted here. Many of you probably seen this slide before. Comparing our assessment that we did with the third party, with an outside facilitator, and what's going on with building these maturity models, I would guess we're probably around the 2 range for the different factions of the people side of that UAM is bringing about. Maybe a little bit further to technology, but people and processes. The people side would be probably a solid 2. I think we're roughly a 3 in processes, inching toward 4, and probably the same for technology. And we do recognize that we need to be doing this on a periodic basis, this being an assessment of where we are and continuing to improve this, because we're going to be expanding this PMO to other asset classes. We have the distribution system for water and for reuse water and all our vertical assets as well. So we need to get this right, and we need to resource it right. That's why we have so much consultant involvement right now that we want to pare back. So some of the conclusions are pretty much reinforcing known principles that we've talked about elsewhere in UAM, that people do drive the change, that the process is important to document it, and that it creates the environment, if you will, to execute the work. And technology are simply the tools that are available to work efficiently, and train people is part of that. But silos are good centers of excellence, as I think Mark Poling talks about from time to time, but they're castles that can protect turf as well. So one thing that we should take away among many takeaways is roles and expectations must be clear, and that this abstract thing of a PMO that doesn't appear on an org chart is really vital to what we're trying to do, and spending literally tens of millions of dollars wisely. So the next steps that we see is that it could be a model, this whole approach and how we've outlined for other cross-functional initiatives within Toho. As I said, we want to expand it to other asset classes, and we want to continue as appropriate to share our results and updates for the so-called WISE phase. And I'm not thinking it's a phase. I think it's here on out, that I think there's a need for this in our industry, and a need to avoid this is building the airplane while it's flying. Designing and implementing and incorporating the people side in mind can maybe prevent some of this. So that's where I'll end, Richard. It's all back to you. And thank you, Veronica and Tim.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Veronica, Tim, and Mike. That was a really interesting presentation, actually. So much appreciated. Are you okay to take some comments and questions from the group? I'm sure you are.
Absolutely.
Okay, does anyone want to try throwing a hand up if they've got any questions? Think about it. I'll start off. So mine's just, I guess, about the other asset classes and when you take it now. What sort of feedback are you getting around the amount of emergency works that's appearing in those? Or is that essentially less of a concern at this point, and more it's just about that consistent approach to the PMO across all asset classes?
Tim can probably answer a more of a data-driven answer, but I'll give you my impression is that we are really getting good at identifying stuff in advance. Where before, if we had sand in a wet well somewhere in a lift station, We would write a work order, and then that would be that. We didn't see some telltale signs out there that we really need to take a look at more closely. And I think there's some examples out there where we've had some pretty sizable, picking on lift stations for a second, and the lines that feed it and force mains and come out of it. We've ducked some major bullets in our system where it could have been catastrophic. And I chalk that up to the people in the field with a bit more of a sensitivity toward depressions and a sense of urgency that's programmed into that. And hats off to Tim and the asset management part and the rest of those cogs, those gears of cranking through what it is that we need to do in terms of mitigating and then building a project around it and do it quickly and move it to rehabilitation. Tim, you want to try that one? That's a great question, by the way.
What I'll just say is we looked at the emergencies, and I tried to identify what were causing them, what were the common drivers for emergencies. And what we did was we targeted and invested in condition assessment programs that in fact targeted those risk areas. And based on what was learned in the condition assessment programs, included that into the prioritization of projects. So what you didn't have is you didn't have individual groups holding all the knowledge and trying to run with it. What you had was a concerted effort between our operations, engineering, and planning to go after those major drivers that were resulting in the emergency. We will still continue to have them, but by integrating the condition assessment program so that it continues to dial in on those areas of risk, we can identify more of those risks and target investment to address those.
Thanks for that. Scott, did you want to ask something?
Yeah, I was just going to ask Mike, your last slide talked about some lessons learned. What would the three of you have to say about, the biggest challenges that you had? What was the most challenging in moving towards this particular way of doing business?
Wow, I try to narrow it down because there are many. One I would say is that there is, as I kind of mentioned earlier, Scott, there's an abstract feel for this PMO initiative. As I said, does not appear on an org chart. And I think in part it's kind of for field operations to get used to the idea of contributing to this, to engineers and actually becoming, if you will, rising to a project manager level was a little intimidating, I think, for some. And but what I think we did over time was adapt as to what an engineer feels how a project should be managed from an engineering standpoint, and one that's very familiar with what's going on in operations and out in the field. There's a mutual respect there that, in a sense, that has to kind of evolve from that. And that's what we talked about in turf and things like that. That engineering wants things done a certain way, but there is flexibility. There's alternatives. There's a better way to deal with things and use the resources maybe more efficiently and more broadly than we originally imagined. Another one's the dependency on the consultant. We were depending a lot on a consultant that does a lot of work for us, who had to be in a position from some time to move a meeting along, to call the question, to say no. That's not what we're going to do. And that's very uncomfortable for a consultant to do that. And so we kind of realized that, we got to figure out this leadership part of this a little differently and get more ownership going on at the top level of this PMO process, but even then, if you will, the middle ranks, the project level, and really own this thing and communicate more effectively along the way. That's just a couple.
If I could add to that also, Mike, I think the biggest channel was the sheer volume of data, information.
Yes.
We started out saying we've got 700 work orders which are backlogged, and we got to figure out how important these are. How are we going to address them? What order do we need to address these in? But the realization was that there were 5 times as many deficiencies which were known by the organizations through past condition assessments. And getting that information so that you could go ahead and wrap a criticality matrix around that to manage that amount of data so it was understandable by those, looking across the organization and nodding, yeah, those are the right priorities to work with. So the sheer volume of data was a huge obstacle, and the key was looking at our work management system as the central repository because it's accessible by all, and because our field operations folks are very familiar with that. It in essence provides them with a platform by which we can have a common understanding of what in fact is outstanding and provide that transparency, whether it be through looking up work orders or graphically or spatially representing that within our GIS system.
The other thing too is, as Tim says, lots of work orders, and they were aging too. Some were 1,000 days old. So we initially called this effort a war room, not a PMO. So the compromise was the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, if you will.
From my perspective, the area that I most glaringly see is just establishing some processes. That way, some common ways that we do things. That way, as we bring people into this program, we move people out, whatever it is, we have some consistent ways of doing the work, regardless of who's filling roles within this group. So that's been really important.
Yes, she's right. Standardization was an element here too that we needed.
I guess that just prompts another question from me, if that's okay,
Sure.
Around so when you look at the BPMN that you've developed there in those swim lanes, and you talk about the silos, was there specific roles and accountability? Did you apply almost a RACI method across those swim lanes so you understood how the interactions were actually working or how they should be?
Yes, Tim's middle name is Racy. Tim, go ahead with that.
And we found that the RACI tool was very effective for some, but was a complete turnoff for others. But we went ahead and I went ahead and implemented a RACI that identified all of the high-level processes, and then across an exhaustive list of not only the roles you see in the swim lanes here, but almost down to a functional role. And doing so, it was a little complex, but it made it much easier to understand, okay, who do we look towards to get something done? Who's going to be held accountable for getting this done? Who supports it? Who contributes to it? Where can we go for information? So I felt as though that the RACI diagram, and more than willing to share that, was very effective in doing some of the process decomposition and understanding the handoffs of information that was required for the PMO.
Thanks for that. Yeah, that sounds like there's definitely something there. Maybe we haven't across this group, the AMP group, sort of teased that out a little bit in terms of what you found with how that's contributed to sort of moving you forward a fair bit. So I'm trying to think now. I mean, Chris, you've got a question. I'll come to you in a tick. But what we take away from this that we could build into this topic for I guess future focus, something around the RACI might be quite important if we seem to be agreed that sort of asset management is at the center of it and can expand out into this PMO. Yeah, or the idea, the notion of a PMO anyway. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, Chris, you've got a question. Jump on in.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Fine.
Okay. Yeah, it was a great presentation. I really liked the way you framed sort of the identify and to perform the different stages, and especially the color coding exercise based on the maturity of different stages. So speaking of stages, is there like a formal stage gating process implemented in that diagram, or is it more of like a one streamlined process from beginning to the end? So that's my first question. Second question is around, I know the work that's going to go through that process is fairly sort of primarily for sort of maintenance driven work. But if there's any other drivers like, I don't know, growth driven or regulatory driven, how do you consider those into your solution when you design, actual projects to address other drivers?
Well, I'm going to address the second question, at least a facet of it first, and Tim, I'm sure will jump in. But one thing I neglected to say is that the game has changed regulatorily for sanitary sewer overflows. All of us are subject to fining, and we we're under a consent order, not one that's prompting a major amount of construction, but the regulatory nature of what we're doing and what we're trying to prevent has definitely stepped up. And it's something that we do need to incorporate in the designs. And we talked a lot about in this presentation KPIs that were read in a couple of instances that still need to be developed and flushed out. Tim, I know you got something, or maybe not.
I was going to speak to the first item.
Okay.
Which was streamlined process, a single streamlined process. Actually, one of the things that did not translate well into this BPMN are the scheduled initiated tasks. There are a number of things which are on a certain schedule and get kicked off here. The things which are continuous, obviously, the customers continue to call in with issues and deficiencies that we're not aware of. That's a process that continues. Project execution is a continuous process, and communicating status of that process of those projects is a continually ongoing activities. But your condition assessment work is a timed and triggered activity, which will go ahead and will trigger defect identification and then representing those within the work order system. Looking at criticality is a periodic thing. We are moving towards implementation in Innovize's info asset, a decision tree which will help deliver that automatically. But it's something that we continue to look at because we know the condition of these assets continue to change. So there is a periodic inspection which is initiated with our field operation folks for highly critical assets to ensure that we have a firm understanding of the rate of deterioration for those assets and can feed that into revised criticality factors for those assets, and then also adjust project priority order. So scoping will change based on changing conditions. So those processes in the center are continuing to flux, and we look at those in terms of adjustments. Just our Withia project, which is a 5-year project, that has changed a number of times in terms of what that $82 million comprises of based on better information from a condition assessment understanding.
Okay, thank you. Great.
Good question.
John Coltis, you've got a question, John?
Yes, it was really a comment that BPMN modeling does have a very good opportunity to have cycle times and reiterative processes. So maybe that was missed previously, but that's absolutely doable inside BPMN modeling protocol.
Thanks, John. Great. Well, I think that's you've canvassed plenty of questions there. So thanks for answering those, Tim, Mike, and Veronica.
Thanks, Richard.
I think what we're, I guess, to not to close it out, but just to consider what we take forward from this within this topic group, particularly as you've tied it in, Mike and others, with the other groups as well that are happening in terms of change management. You know, we spoke a lot about there. I think your question comes from that perspective to an extent too, Chris. But I think there's some topics that probably move a little bit beyond the process element and are a bit wider for the AMP group that are worth considering. So I'll try and capture some of these in our report out. And I don't think we need to identify them just now, but Scott and Cello, be useful to get some guidance from you both on how those could come into a future sort of program of work as we continue this effort.
Yeah. That's a good comment, Richard. Not going to go solve that right now, but
no.
Do need to start looking forward to, as Mike was saying too, the WISE time frame as well, yep. And what's in store for this group going forward.
Yep.
I think something to consider is how this process is then going to impact the future AMPs that get developed by Toho Water. I mean, obviously, this process is going to change the whole dynamic in terms of now what goes into the next AMP or a series of AMPs, and I think that would be kind of interesting to think through. You know, your data is not static anymore; it's changing. You know, almost monthly. And how do you then, you know, keep your asset management plans up to date with this other process sort of running alongside of it?
You're right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and have I interpreted it correctly? But it sounds like your data was actually pretty good. And, you know, we've spoken in the AMP group a lot around our confidence in the quality of data, its age, etc. But by the sounds of it, there was a wealth of it there. So you had a fairly good, you know, starting point to undertake this prioritization method from anyway. Is that fair to say?
There's so much more we could have showed you in aiming for 20 minutes. I'm serious here. That Tim and his team and the asset management, as well as the Wi-Fi aspect and all the products that are coming out of it that are data related, it's quite extensive. And we'll be challenged to expand this, but it's something that we could share at some point and get a more detail, whatever the team here wants to do.
Yep. Okay. Well, I think that's probably one I'll note down as well, because we spoke a lot about data and its quality in year one, and it's been a recurring theme throughout the workshops that we've done this year as well.
Yeah. Tim?
So let's add that in.
I would just add that I think we had a very good understanding of the quality of our data. It's not that it was complete, it's not that it was perfect, right. But I think we have a very good understanding of where the gaps are, where the warts are, and where we need to work to continue to improve that. And focus on that information and that data collection, which actually will drive the program in an effective manner, not just collect data to make sure that we have complete data.
Yep.
I just wanted to point out we're a little bit beyond our allocated time.
Yep.
And I'll stop the recording. So
that's fine.
Just a second.
Well, we